So I'm going to go ahead and close this one out. And we'll jump into our next example, which is we have this kind of pipe model. And so this one is a little bit more involved, and we're also going to want to add some additional like layers of complexity here just so that it looks a little bit neater. But so for first thing we want to do is make sure our UVs are laid out. So I have my pipe low poly. And if you click off of this model, you also notice that there will be some edges here that are actually hard edged. In general, what I try to do with objects like this, and so it could be, for example, if you had it even more hard edged, you might have maybe if I did like mesh display set to face, you might see that all of these edges are faceted. In general, I try to resolve this just by going and using the kind of averaging tool that Maya has. So if you go to mesh display, soften, harden edges, options box, method, you can use angle. Now you could also use texture borders, and this is actually kind of a neat thing. So I'm going to show you really quick just doing angle, because generally angle is the kind of thing that I want to adhere to. And I would usually do an angle between like 30 and 45 degrees. So I'm actually going to do 45 here. And then I'm going to say soften, harden, edge. And then what you'll notice is that anything that is under 45 degrees becomes soft, and everything that is over 45 degrees becomes hard. So you'll see these are hard edges, but then all the edges kind of going across the span will be soft. And that will make better results for our overall normal map in the future. Now, if we did want to make UVs first, we could go back to that option and we could set texture borders. There's only a couple of situations where I often don't love using texture borders, and it's usually because of things like when you have to create cuts along spans, like you have to actually cut the inside of this tube in order to unfold it. And so I kind of watch out for that a little bit. But so, okay, so let's go ahead and jump into our UV mapping. And so there's a lot of different ways that we could approach this. I've noticed an issue in Maya 2018. I don't know if it's happened much in older versions, but I have seen it happen before, where models don't really unwrap very well or unfold very well if you actually haven't created the edges that they need. So if, for example, if I were to go to click on the checker pattern here, there might be sections of this model that actually don't display in the checker, and in some cases those are actually parts of the model that you can't really easily unfold. But one thing that you also need to do is you need to make sure that everything is sewn together, so all the edges are sewn together. So if you just like you hit the model and the first thing you do is you just like do a planar map of the entire model, you can easily make sure that all the UVs are created and projected, and also that the edges are all sewn together. Now, if you didn't do it that way, you could also select all the edges, and you could go select those and go to cut and sew and select sew, just so that it eliminates the outside edges so that you can just cut them manually. But I'm going to go ahead and actually just use the planar mapping option because I found it resolves some issues that I've had in the past. You just hit planar map and then you can go about the rest of your business. So, okay, so we're gonna UV unwrap this model a little bit differently. So because we're just going to unfold, we're not going to use planar mapping of specific components. So I'm going to double click on this edge, and then I'm going to go to cut and sew and select cut. So you'll see that it'll create a white outline there showing that a cut edge has been made. I'm going to double click on this edge here, select cut and sew, select cut for that as well. Then I'm also going to do the same thing on this side here. I'm going to cut and sew, select cut. I'm going to double click on this edge, select cut and sew, and select cut. And then I'm just going to go down the same one, and I can select multiples at the same time. So I can double click on that one, shift double click, shift double click, shift double click. And then I can select cut, sew, cut, or I could hit shift, right click, cut while hovering over the UV editor, or I could select shift X and cut as well. Okay, so then obviously this will not unfold yet, so we actually need to cut the spans that continue all the way across in 3D space. So I'm just going to pick a spot. Doesn't necessarily matter too much. I'm going to grab this edge, and this edge. And then I'm also going to grab one of these inside edges. Okay, and so then I'm going to select cut. So, cut. And then basically what I want to do from here is I want to select the UVs. Right-click, select UV. I'm going to drag a selection over all of these. I'm going to use a set of tools. So I'm going to go to Modify, Unfold Options. I'm going to make sure it uses Unfold 3D. I'm going to check the box for Pack, which will mean that it will unfold the UVs evenly. So it'll like unfold them and then try to position them. And then I'll just go ahead and for right now, that'll be fine. And I'll hit Apply and Close. And then you should get something that looks roughly like this. So if you look at it, if I select the faces here, you'll see that that's the outside faces. These are the inside faces. These are the faces moving across this span. And then these are like basically the top sections, top and underside sections of the pipe. Okay. Now I want to double check and make sure that this actually is going to be representing the surface correctly. So I'm going to right-click, select all my UVs. I'm going to go to Modify, Layout, Options. I want to select Unfold 3D, Shell Pre-Rotation, Horizontal, so that they'll all lay out uniformly. Shell Pre-Scaling, Preserve 3D Ratios, Rotate Shells, and usually I do about 8 shell padding, but you could do more if you're doing a higher resolution texture. You could do less if you're doing a lower res. And then go ahead and select Layout UVs. And then that just means that the pieces are actually going to be laid out more accurately to their actual size rather than being skewed. Now we could improve this UV layout so that we can get a little extra mileage out of it, but the circular pieces can become a little bit difficult just because they're kind of hard to wrangle. And if I look at this, I mean, it's got a reasonable amount of coverage. So I think for right now, I'm just going to probably leave this alone and we can move on to making our high poly. So I'm going to go ahead and close out my UVs. Actually, let me open that up really quick. I'm going to turn off the shaded view because it shows on the model the rest of the time. And then I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate this. I'm going to turn this pipe into pipe high. And I'm going to hide the low poly. And we're going to go through and just make... we're going to make creases, but we're also going to make some extra details so that you can see what types of effects you can have on this model. So first thing I want to do is I want to make some bolts that are on both of the sides of this mesh. So I'm going to select, I'm going to create a simple model. First of all, I'm going to click on this pipe high and select, there's a little icon here for make live. This is looks like the magnet on the far right. That makes this model something that I can then draw on. Then I'm going to go to create polygon primitives, select interactive creation. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the cylinder tool and I'm going to drag out a cylinder just somewhere on this shape. And then I'm going to pull that up like so. Now I want to make some changes to this shape. So one of them is I'm going to change the subdivision axis to 5. And then the other one is that I am going to move the pivot. And that's just because I want to make sure that I have better control over it. Now, in general, you always want to model objects in the center of your scene because that makes things like moving the pivot a lot easier. So I'm going to do is roughly kind of see if I can position this like right around where I want it to be. And I'm actually going to turn off Make Live now because I don't need it anymore. I'm going to hit the Insert key. And then I need to click on this little thing that expands this this menu here. It looks like a little arrow pointing to the right. I'm going to type in 0, 0, 0. In this case, that goes to the center of the model. And then basically what I can do is I can... I'm going to call this bolt. And then I can hit... what I can do is I can hit Control D. And then I can rotate this, and I can rotate it around the pipe. Now I actually want to rotate it in specific steps. And I think roughly I'm going to rotate it around 30 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the tool settings. So I'm going to rotate this back to 0 for a second. Click on the tool settings. What I want to do is then turn on step snap. And I can do either one is fine. I think relative is fine. And then 15 is the default. I'm going to change that to 30. Then I'm going to close that out, and then I'm just going to rotate this one by one step. Duplicate one step, 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 duplicate step, duplicate step, and duplicate. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that that set of bolts. I'm going to hit Control D for right now. Actually, I accidentally hit 3 on the keyboard, but and then in this case I'm just going to pull them up, and just so that they're not non-uniform. I want to make sure that I actually I turn off the 3 key for previewing that for both. Okay, and so I've got that there. I've got those kind of basic details. And then I also want to go ahead and put together creases for each of these pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that I select these models. And I'm going to go to the attribute editor. And then on the smooth mesh, I want to make sure that my subdivisions are increased. And the only thing that's kind of annoying about this is that actually I don't think it lets you multi-object edit these. So somebody who's particularly good at mel scripting could easily increase the number of subdivisions in the preview here. By doing it in mel scripting. Offhand, I'm not an expert at doing that, so we probably should have done that beforehand. But while I'm talking about this, I'm basically getting it done, so we should be fine. Boo. All right, and remember that we're changing the preview division levels because we want to make sure that it's going to roughly render accurately when we show our smooth previews, right? So, all right, and yeah, this is a great section of this video, but it should be fine. Okay, almost done. Okay, there we go. All right, and so then let's go ahead and start making some creases real quick. So first off, I'm going to go to the pipe high. Go to Windows, Modeling Editors, Crease Sets. I'm going to create a new crease set, but I want to start by actually selecting the edges that I want. So I'm going to double-click on this edge, double-click on this edge, double-click on this edge, and double-click on this edge. And those will be the outside pipe edges. So I'm going to create new. I'm going to call this pipe underscore outside edge. Then I'm going to select double click on this edge here, double click on this edge here. And I'm going to create a new crease set. I'm going to call this pipe inside edge. And then I'm going to double click on the edge at the top here. Shift double click on the edge at the bottom here. I'm going to make a new crease, and this one I'm going to call pipe underscore top bottom edge. And then if I hit the 3 key on the keyboard, I will see that it will smooth all of these edges uniformly. But then if I click off of them for a second, I can actually adjust these edges individually so that they give me more of the effect that I want. So like, for example, the pipe outside edge, I think, is one that should actually be a harder edge. So I'm going to hit 3 real quick and see how that looks. I might actually try hitting 4. Okay, so that looks like a pretty tight edge. Then for the inside edge, this one actually, in a lot of cases, pipes like that have a fairly soft edge. So I might actually do like maybe 2.5, something like that. So you'll see that there's some smoothing, but not a hideous amount. And then on this top-bottom edge, I'm actually going to probably do somewhere in between. So if I do like a 3 or something like that, then we'll like get kind of a good balance there. Okay, but then we also have these other models here, and this can be pretty helpful. So I can go ahead and say select this asset here. I can hit the 3 key on the keyboard. And then just quickly taking a look at it, because I know that this asset is simple enough that I probably actually just want to put all of the edges into the same crease set. I can create a new crease set for this one. And actually, wait. You got to make sure if I select the edges first, I can grab all these edges, and I can create a new crease set. And then I can modify this so that it gives me roughly the amount of creasing that I'm looking for. So I want this to be a little bit creased because I want it to be something that you can actually kind of see as a detail in the model. So I think I'm actually probably going to leave it at that setting for crease for right now. And we'll see if it works. Actually, maybe I'll modify it a little bit, like maybe 2.25, just so it makes it a little bit tighter. And then what I can do is I can select this model. For example, I can hit 3 key on the keyboard, and then I can select the edges here, and I can click Add, and I can do that for each of these models. But then, like, obviously, if I wanted to do this in a more efficient way, I could just basically do the crease on one, and then I could quickly duplicate it out. So we don't have to worry about the recreation of that same effect over and over again. So it's always a good idea before you duplicate things out to actually just know what it is that you're trying to accomplish and to actively do that. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate, and you can also grab chunks of them and duplicate them together. So I can hit Control-D and switch back to the rotate tool. I can rotate a section, and then I can duplicate these, and so on. Okay, so I've got a little bit of like this bolt detail here. I'm going to then go ahead and do the same thing on the underside. So I'm just going to select all these edges. I'm sorry, all these model sections. Go ahead and delete those. Go into my outliner. I can grab my bolts. I can hit Control-D. And actually, in this case, because I remember I did this in kind of a reverse order, I can just hit the Y-axis, and I can type in 0 there. And then I've got that detail over there as well. Now, let's say there's something else that I might want to do. And this sometimes happens, like say if you're trying to make something that's a little more realistic. You might also want to say add a little bit of a divot or paneling look into the main body of the model. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another edge here. So I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop Tool. Actually, those 2 edges should be fine. So I'm going to select those edges. Then I'm actually going to Shift double click, grab that edge, Shift double click, grab that edge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bevel these edges, but I also want to actually make an incision sort of going down one of the sides too. So I'm actually going to grab these 3 edges here. And then I'm going to go to Edit Mesh Bevel. And I should be able to just click on the button there. Then I can, I'm actually going to turn off Smooth for a second, so I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard. And I'm going to adjust the fraction so that it creates a little bit of a separation there. I'm going to create an additional segment, so 2 segments. And then if I adjust depth, that's not going to make much of a difference, so I don't need to really worry about that too much. But actually, you'll notice something kind of neat here is that actually that is kind of a nice effect. Okay. Actually, that looks fine. I actually kind of like that. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is, and now that I have these additional edges on the inside, I'm going to double click on this one, shift double click on this one, switch to the scale tool, and I'm going to just scale these in a little bit on this axis. Then I'm going to grab, let's see, grab this edge maybe from the top here, then go down all the way to this point, maybe something like right around there, shift double click. And then I can just switch to the move tool and I can just subtly like kind of shift it inward. And then if I switch to hitting the 3 key to show what I've created, you see I've created this kind of impression of like a little bit of a paneling. Now, this would be helpful to actually include some additional creases, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to select each of the edges that it basically confines the paneling. So we'll shift double click, shift double click. I'll just make sure it looks like that'll be roughly it. And then I'm going to create a new crease set. First of all, I need to rename the other crease set, so I'm going to rename this Bolt. Bolt crease. That'll be fine. And then this new crease set that I just created, I'm going to call this panel underscore outside edge. And then I'm also going to create another crease set for the panel inside edges. So I'm just going to double click on that inset there, shift double click, shift double click. So I can grab all those inside edges. And then I'm going to create a new crease set. I'm going to call this panel inside edge. And then just to kind of like finish this off, what I'm going to do is create a set of some simple little, like not like small, not bolts per se, but sort of like yeah, I guess kind of like smaller bolts, so that we can place them there. And I'm just going to do them just really, really simple. I'm just going to right-click, select Object Mode. With the pipe high poly here, I'm going to go to Mesh. I'm sorry, not Mesh. I'm going to select Make Live. So I'm going to click on that one piece there, so that I can see more clearly where parts are while I'm still doing this. I'm also going to go to Shading, Wireframe on Shaded, so I can actually see more clearly where those edges are. And then I'm going to create a small, a very, very small cylinder piece. I want to make sure that this actually has fewer subdivisions than this, so I'm going to probably change it from 20 to about 6. I'm going to flatten it so that it's very, very flat. And then I want to hit the 3 key. I'm actually going to probably, that's probably pretty close to what I want, but I'm actually going to grab the top faces here. Oops, and I want to turn off Make Live real quick so I can control it more easily. I'm going to make those faces a little bit inset. And then if I switch to the object mode and I smooth it, you can see it roughly is creating this kind of little pockmark thing. And then I just want to make sure that I can actually duplicate this easily enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and make a huge number of copies of this. Now I'm actually not going to make any creases for this, so I don't need to increase the smooth preview or any of that. I'm going to minimize this crease editor here for a second. And then I'm going to go to hit the insert key. And I don't want to type in on the Y because the Y is up and down, but I do want to type 0 on X and Z. And then basically what I can do, actually might scale this up a little bit, honestly. So I'm going to go back for a second. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger because you want to make sure it's still something that you can clearly see. It's actually adding a meaningful shape. So I just undid placing that or changing the pivot just because I want to make this a little bigger first. Okay, then I'm going to hit the insert key, type 0 on X and 0 on Z. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, this time I'm actually going to turn off my discrete rotate. So I'm going to switch to the rotate tool, hold down the E key and hold down the left mouse. I can uncheck discrete rotate very easily that way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control D and we also want to make sure. Okay, yeah, so we also want to, before we do that, let's go ahead and, I think it's going to be the Y-axis. I want to rotate it to 0 on the Y-axis, probably 0 on the X-axis, and about 90 on the Z-axis, just so that it'll be roughly aligned. Maybe make it a little bit rotated that way. And then that way I can do the pivot again. So I'm going to hit the insert key, 0 on X, 0 on Z. Okay. And then I can duplicate. And then when I rotate this out, say I can kind of rotate it, over to the other side. And then I'm just going to grab these, Control D, move them down. And then I'm going to shift select all of them that I have selected there. I'm going to move these down. Shift select the next set. Move them down. And then I'm probably going to not be able to do the full set there. So I'm going to duplicate one there. And then do the same thing kind of going down. So I'm going to try to just quickly duplicate these so that I get them onto either side of this, with these pipe sections. And okay. And then I can go ahead and I can grab a chunk and duplicate them. So I can go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Control D. Move those down. Control D, move those down. Control D, move those down, and Control D. I'm gonna, I guess, move that up. I think that looks like actually it's roughly the right amount. Okay. Okay. So just to switch back to object mode for a second, if I now what I can do is I can select say one of these sets. And actually, I'm just going to start at the top. Might as well just do that here. So if I hit Control D, duplicate this. Now what I want to do is I actually want to rotate this by a uniform amount. So there's an easier set of tools for doing this. So I want to show you how to do that. Basically, what I can do is I can hit duplicate. And I can rotate it. So if I have this here, I can hit Control D, and then I can duplicate that and move it. Then I can say Shift D, which would be duplicate with transform. And so I can just keep hitting Shift D And I can do that all the way around, so Shift D. Actually, I could have done that before, but it's always a good idea to just be mindful of the various tools that you have. So I'm just taking Shift D to keep rotating those around. Okay. All right. And then what I can do is I can grab all those that we just created, and actually I could probably just select from here all the way down. That'll grab all that selection. I can hit Control D, drag that over here, Control D. Oh, actually, I want to move that, undo a couple times, move that down a tiny bit more. Control D. Okay. And then I'm just going to keep doing that. Just sort of finalize this design. And then I'm going to do one more Control D onto the bottom here. And then, yeah, so, okay, so we've got our kind of basic plan here. I'm going to do the shading, wireframe on shading, and turn that off really quick. And then what we're going to do is I can either smooth these all together, and I'm just going to basically, I'm going to do this as kind of a simple pass because we know most of these details are actually not in our low poly, so I'm going to end up basically just smoothing each of these pieces and then combining them together. But you don't necessarily have to combine them together. Actually, yeah, no, let's not combine them together. I'll show you how that works. So I'll go ahead and I'll grab the whole pipe, all these pieces. I'm actually going to save this really quick in case it crashes, because that is possible. I need to remove a device from my computer because it moves really slow. Okay, I'm going to save this as my ASCII. Make this pipe normal. Save as. So we have all these models selected here. I'm going to go to Mesh, Smooth. And it may take a second just because there's all these different models. Doop, doop, doo. Okay. And so it has a number of divisions. By the way, you probably want to make sure that you're not doing smooth preview. So I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard really quick. And in this case, you could do anywhere from 4 to 6. I'm a little worried about doing 6, but I'll go ahead and do it because my computer is pretty fast. So it's going to take a second. You will not immediately see this change. But okay. All right. So, all right. And so then, that we've got this kind of like fairly detailed model here. Obviously, we didn't go out of our way to make all kinds of additional details on the inside, which we totally could have. But this is I think this is a reasonably good design for this piece. Actually, one thing that we want to watch out for is actually it looks like it didn't do the same subdivisions for all these pieces. So we probably want to do more there. Now I could go through this and try to do, every individual one like that. But what I could also do is I could go back and change the tool settings so that it actually picks the correct smooth. But in this case, I think it's probably for the best that I didn't actually smooth all of the pieces at 6. So these will be substantially more optimal to just not be smooth that much. So I'm just going to quickly go through that, get this wrapped up. Poop. This is the downside of making a video and being like, oh, I could have done this a little more optimally, but, I'm already here recording it. So in any case, I mean, you really don't lose a huge amount of time just by going and saying, all right, I'm going to tweak these pieces a little bit, which is not too bad. So, okay. So, all right. I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, looks like we got all these. Got this one. That's one thing that's unfortunate, is that you got to be mindful that a lot of tools in Maya don't actually allow like multi-object edits, which is one thing that's kind of annoying, but you know, it's kind of how it works. So, okay, so we got this pipe here. I think it looks pretty decent. Now, if we want to project this, then basically what we want to do is we're going to unhide the low poly. So Shift H. I'm going to select the low poly. I'm going to switch to the modeling tab to the rendering tab. Go to lighting, shading, transfer maps. So we've got that pipe there. I'm going to select the envelope, and I just need to make it sure that it's big enough that it captures those bolts. Oops, 104. That's not what I wanted. So reasonably high. Okay. So in that case, it looks like 6. 6 is roughly what we're shooting for there. Then in the source meshes, in this case, we can select all of these individual separate objects, and I could go add selected to the source meshes. Now, this may not be the most efficient way to do this, but it does add all of those pieces, and it will count all of those pieces when we make the normal map. So just to show you that that works that way, I'm going to change this to pipe normal. And then I'm just going to go ahead and you got our common output, etc. And I'm just going to, we got our crease set, so close that out just so we can see the display. And I'm going to select bake. So this may take a little bit longer. It will probably take substantially longer than the other normal map, just because it's a more complicated set of assets, but not insanely long. But you can see how using creases allows us to do something like that much more quickly versus if we were to have to create control edges for all the different parts. So I would say in my tier of workflows, probably the best workflow for high poly is going to be ZBrush. The second best workflow is probably going to be the Crease. And then the third best, which is still a valid workflow, would be the control edges and subdivision modeling workflow. So all of those are equally able to get good results, but in general, you get some functionality and sort of speed at creating advanced details, realistic kind of organic details in ZBrush. And the Crease workflow is just generally quite a lot faster to get to an end result than the control edge workflow. So that's why in general I would kind of recommend doing that. So okay, so it looks like we're about 60% of the way through. Now we could have combined all those pieces together, and that would be totally fine. Because we just have the one low poly asset, it doesn't really matter if there's separate pieces for the high poly with only one piece for the low poly. If we do have separate pieces for the low poly that we'd like to bake separately, then we'd actually have to do a couple of different baking passes, but I'm not going to really cover that until we get into talking about Substance, because I think Substance is a much better tool for that. So in general, if you're baking multiple sub-objects, like, say, the butt of a gun for the low poly and the high poly, and baking those together, but then having the barrel or the trigger or anything like that baked separately, there's a better workflow to doing that. So, but this should give you kind of a general idea of sort of how you go about creating these pieces. So it looks like we're at 98%. We'll do that thing where it fails right at 99%, probably. Okay, cool. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select all of my high poly pieces here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Control H. And then you can see both the good and the bad here, because there's some things that worked out better than others. Obviously, you can see there's a little bit of distortion in the shape on these bolts, and that's largely due to the fact that it has a large search envelope, and there are some things we can do to resolve that, but I mean, I think that for right now this is okay. And then you can see that we've got this kind of we've got these little like circular divots here, and then the creases in the side of the model, as well as the curvature going on around here. But now let's talk about this really quick. This problem that we have here, and that's a worthwhile thing to address because in a lot of cases you will run into a situation where you're like saying, hey, actually this is not how I wanted this to look. Why does it look that way? And there's a few different ways that you can resolve that, but one of them is you can actually make you can have a low poly model, but you can also have another low poly bake model. And so if I hit Control D on this low poly, for example, I can go ahead and call this low underscore bake. And usually the way that you can resolve situations like that is you can just reduce the amount of distortion that is made by just adding edges that make the shape project more specifically. So I'm going to go from my rendering tab back to my modeling tab, and I'm just going to really quickly go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop Tool, and I'm just going to actually just do that. I'll just create, I just created 2 edges there because that's what the setting already had. And so I'm just going to leave that there. And what I'm going to do is instead of using the pipe low shape, I'm going to select the pipe low bake. Sorry, I just interrupted the video so that you didn't have to see the baking process again, and I simplified the scene a little bit, like combining these assets just so that be a little bit quicker. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hide the high poly. I'll show you what the result is. So we've got our original bake, which is the one that has all this distortion here. And then we've got our updated bake, which actually has no distortion at all. Now, the one thing that you want to watch out for is that in this case, these bolts ended up not really showing up super well because they're very aligned with the surface, but that is more like what I was expecting to see from the outcome. So, but what's cool though is that we have these 2 different textures here, but I actually can go ahead and update the texture on the original one if I go ahead and select reload, because I saved it over the same texture. You'll notice that I can actually use the fact that I have this low poly bake, which just has additional subdivision edges, to control the outcome of any kind of like odd behavior or distortion that's happening in that other low poly. So, and this is actually a pretty common thing that you can do to try to avoid distortion or something that is happening a little bit extremely without actually having to add additional details into your low poly model for your final game render or your final scene. Okay, so yeah, so I mean, really that's my general primer of like how to get started working with the kind of normal mapping crease workflow. In the future, I'm going to jump into this on the substance side, but I think that this set of 3 videos should give you a good grasp of sort of how normal maps work and how to create them in Maya, as well as some of the techniques that are used to go about constructing some of those details. And then you can dig into that yourself and make some pretty cool assets. So thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you giving this video series a watch. I look forward to seeing your awesome models.